discussion. Okay, and we're now live streaming on Twitter and Facebook. So as I said, welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Carrie Mendoza. I'm an emergency medicine physician here in Chicago, and I also practice in Wisconsin. And I'm the Director of Fair Medicine. Today, we're going to be talking about DEI programming and medical education. We are so honored today to have Senator Ron Johnson, who's from Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He's been serving as a senator from Wisconsin since 2010. He was reelected for his third term. He's the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. He was from 2015 to 2021, and now is a ranking member for the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. He also serves on the Subcommittee on Healthcare, and we are very honored again to have him here as part of our discussion. We also have John Seiler, who's the Senior Fellow, Director of University Policy for the National Association of Scholars. And he's done quite a bit of work in this area and had a specific experience at the Medical College of Wisconsin that he's going to talk with us about. And then we are also very pleased and honored to have Kenny Hsu, who's a very accomplished writer. He's on the FAIR Board of Advisors, as well as the president of Color Us United, which is a nonprofit advocating for race-blind American culture. He has done quite a bit of work in the medical space, specifically at University of North Carolina, and he's gonna speak to us about his accomplishments with changing the DEI culture there for the better. He also has a book coming out in August called School of Woke, and that promises to be very revealing and engaging. So we thank Kenny also for being here. And with those brief introductions, I'd like to pass it over to John Seiler to share with us his experience with the Medical College of Wisconsin and his research on DEI in medical education.
Thank you so much for having me. So for several years, I've documented the growth and consequences of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in higher education. My initial focus wasn't on science or medicine. Rather, I started reporting simply by asking questions, reading university documents, and observing trends. To my surprise, I found that medical and scientific institutions were some of the most enthusiastic about remaking themselves under this broad and often ambiguous notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. And though in the abstract these terms sound innocuous, they've served, I would argue, to politicize our institutions and really divert them from their true missions. So I'll just give you a few examples of the kinds of stories I've written over the last several years and some of the consequences of the stories that I've uncovered. So for instance, in 2021, I reported on actually the UNC School of Medicine's now infamous, thanks to Kenny, task force to integrate social justice into the curriculum. That's a task force created by the School of Medicine. And now Kenny will, I'm sure, get into this in much greater detail, but I think it so perfectly illustrates the entire paradigm that there are a few things worth pointing out about it. The task force recommended that the School of Medicine adopt several dozen policies, including requiring faculty to adhere to specific core concepts, which included that specific organs and cells don't belong to specific genders. It recommended mandatory student advocacy, medical student advocacy, and it even listed out the political causes that those students ought to advance. It also recommended adding a social justice domain to the school's promotion and tenure guidelines, making DEI an effective faculty job requirement. Needless to say, this was far from an uncontroversial call to treat everyone with respect. Instead, UNC's DEI task force espoused a set of highly controversial and tenuous political and social views. And initially, the medical school indicated that it was planning to carry out every one of the recommendations on the list. But UNC is not alone. Medical schools across the country have embraced similarly far-reaching DEI policies, often encouraged by medical organizations. So for example, last year I published a draft of the Association of American Medical Colleges DEI competencies, basically a set of standards for teaching DEI in medicine. The competencies call on students to practice allyship when facing such injustices as microaggressions. In fact, they similarly call on faculty to teach how how systems of power, privilege, and oppression inform policies and practices, and how to engage with systems to disrupt oppressive practices. Of course, much hangs on your precise definition of what an oppressive practice might be. Remarkably, when the AAMC released these official guidelines, replete with the language of identity politics, the organization's president went so far as to say that DEI, quote, deserves just as much attention from learners and educators at every stage of their careers as the latest scientific breakthroughs. That's a remarkable statement. DEI deserves as much attention from doctors and medical students as the latest scientific breakthroughs. Examples like these abound. Our medical and scientific institutions are deeply, deeply committed to whatever falls under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And increasingly, that commitment is no longer optional for scholars and scientists. Rather, it's required dogma. To give one salient example, a few years ago, Texas Tech University's Department of Biological Sciences passed a resolution promising to heavily weigh faculty job candidates' contributions to DEI in the hiring process. Basically, judge faculty job candidates for how well they contribute to DEI. Through an open records request, I acquired the department's evaluations of candidates for several of the most recent jobs that were listed by the department. On the department's own scoring matrix, contributions to DEI made up more than 1/5 of the total points awarded for a candidate. So that could your contributions to DEI could really make or break you as a candidate for a position in the Department of Biological Sciences. But here's the really disturbing thing. Ultimately, candidates were punished for essentially expressing unorthodox views. And at the same time, they were praised, according to these documents that I acquired, for repeating the tropes of identity politics. One candidate was penalized because he, quote, mentioned that DEI is not an issue because he respects his students and treats them all equally. Expressing a commitment to race neutrality gets you punished according to this paradigm. Another was penalized for showing, quote, poor understanding of the difference between equity and equality, which, as many of you will know, is a pretty consistent trope in sort of progressive identity politics. That trope is almost always used to advance the idea that equality of opportunity is not enough, and there should be equal outcomes enforced, not just, or should be ultimately enforced through policy. Meanwhile, other candidates were praised for including things like land acknowledgements in their talks, or for demonstrating an awareness of unconscious bias or microaggressions. This is not just the initiative, however, of a few enterprising departments. My reporting has shown over and over again that it's increasingly common for scientists to be judged on their commitment to DEI as a basic condition for employment, good standing, and funding. And I can't tell you how many departments have voluntarily chosen to equally weigh teaching, research, and DEI contributions when hiring university faculty in all disciplines, whether it be the humanities or medicine or the sciences. And of course, this brings up huge issues for academic freedom as well as sound science and scholarship. You can't think freely when you're being assessed for your commitment to a social cause, especially one with obviously political connotations like DEI. Moreover, this criterion has nothing to do with whether a candidate is a good doctor or scientist. It really brings up questions about how high quality our science can be when we are prioritizing something that is so independent of whether somebody is competent in their discipline. And this is a very serious matter because medical science and all fields of science are very important for our, for a variety of things. Most obviously important for people's health in the case of medical science. So in my writing, I haven't shied away from making this point clear. And for this reason, because of my expertise on the topic of DEI in science and in medicine, I was invited by the Wisconsin Association of Scholars to speak at their annual symposium at the Medical College of Wisconsin, along with Wisconsin State Representative David Murphy, and of course, Senator Ron Johnson, who's here with us today. I was delighted to be able to speak at a medical school where my research is no doubt highly relevant. But as word spread about the event, many students and faculty began to object to my presence on campus. Soon, around 1,000 of them signed a petition against the event, specifically citing, well, my presence. The preface to the letter said, quote, "The keynote speaker, John Seiler, has spoken widely against DEI initiatives," adding that as faculty, they are, quote, "in opposition to MCW hosting this pseudo-academic and potentially harmful meeting." Amusingly, the letter acknowledges the importance of free expression, saying, quote, "Certainly the tradition of academic freedom is vital for discourse in our fractured time. However," it goes on, "there is no evidence that this event is designed to, nor is it grounded in research evidence." This leads the petitioners to a somewhat perplexing line of reasoning. They say, "The lead scholar of this meeting does not have any peer-reviewed publications related to DEI, and it alleges that I published texts that use discriminatory language towards underrepresented groups. Its takeaway, thus, academic freedom, civil liberties, and freedom of speech do not dictate that this event should take place at our private institution. It is not designed to accomplish a discussion, but to espouse a single point of view." Shortly afterwards, MCW President John Raymond announced in an email that he had rescinded the use of the medical school's facility for the event. In his email, Raymond acknowledges that a fundamental purpose of a university is to facilitate the exchange of ideas. But then he adds, "The exchange of ideas should not disrupt the core functions of a university or jeopardize the safety of our MCW community." And thus he felt the need to keep the event from taking place at MCW. In his email, he goes on to argue that his decision is not due to either the topic or the viewpoints of the speakers. Now, the event moved to a different location. We had a good discussion, though sadly, without the engagement of the medical school, which likely would have benefited greatly from hearing an alternative perspective on this increasingly important topic in higher education and in medicine in general. And I don't think we should actually read too much into either of these letters sent out in protest and then announcing the cancellation of this event. It, simply put, it was a classic heckler's veto by which a small group of people who are upset about the existence of a speaker get to dictate whether that speaker or those speakers can come to an event or speak on campus. But I'd say the episode perfectly illustrates the issues I've highlighted for the last several years. It perfectly illustrates that a commitment to DEI is required for good standing in higher education, regardless of what those terms actually signify. And moreover, it shows that for many, it's hard to even conceive of how someone could think another way about this issue. For many of the people who signed the petition and alleged all sorts of things about me that they provided no evidence for and argued that this event jeopardizes safety, for many of these people, there was no recognition that there might be any reason to cast doubt upon or bring about or be skeptical of this broad umbrella, this broad concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they showed a remarkable lack of curiosity about why somebody would criticize these concepts, especially since I will personally admit that, of course, all of them sound on their face innocuous. diversity, equity, inclusion, these terms sound like something that's good. The reaction you should have when you hear that somebody's criticizing policies under the banner of diversity, equity, and inclusion shouldn't be disgust that somebody would criticize a basic value that no reasonable person could disagree with. If you really think no reasonable person could disagree with these terms, then maybe you should, it should give you pause that anybody is bringing up these disagreements. That's what a discussion like the one we were intending to have at MCW was supposed to accomplish. But the upshot of all of this is that it's increasingly difficult to even object to DEI now. And that has huge and lasting consequences for the future of the academy, the future of the sciences. And I think that has major downstream ramifications for the entire country. It leads to the spread of divisive and tendentious and tenuous ideas. It creates a lack of seriousness in the sciences. And ultimately, it can be used as a tool for creating and enforcing a blind consensus. That's the reason I wanted to speak at this campus. And that's the reason that the MCW's reaction means all the more that people should question and speak out against this reigning attempt to keep views from being expressed. So with that, I will hand things over.
Oh, thank you, John. We appreciate your work so much. Obviously, this topic is so important because, as you pointed out, there's just this rigid thinking. But when you're talking about patient care and learning about diseases, we need to really be teaching students to look at all patients as people we really want to help, regardless of their background, regardless if they're homeless people or have whatever problem. So this thinking, that's this rigid DEI thinking, is really just the opposite of what it means to be a great physician, and also trying to control your environment too. And that way is really the opposite, certainly, of a lot of things that happen in healthcare. So we need that nimble thinking and really looking at people as unique, beautiful people that we want to help. So, it's so disturbing for us as practicing physicians to hear all this. I put in the chat something that came out that was actually from the emergency department at UNC, with a very welcoming title called "Dear White People." And so part of this is that there's this sort of very off-putting culture of blaming people based on immutable characteristics. And that's not the way to build camaraderie in healthcare either. You work as a team. I'm dependent on my nurses, techs, other doctors, paramedics to point things out. So I feel that this movement also it really is painting their colleagues in a very negative light, which is the opposite, again, of functional healthcare. So with that touch point on UNC, I'll pass it over to Kenny Xu, who has done quite a bit of work at UNC, especially through the medical school. So we want to hear more about what he did and the successes there, because we can roll these things back. So I'll turn it over to you, Kenny. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you. I'm sure many of us here remember the University of Minnesota and that viral video of the University of Minnesota's Hippocratic Oath ceremony, where they asked their medical students, instead of to recite the Hippocratic Oath, the do no harm oath, to recite an oath that included land acknowledgement of native lands, the history of slave ownership in medicine, the continued racism sparked by the BLM riots of George Floyd, and other political statements in which medical students should never take part in ever for any reason, because we're a medical school and they're a public medical school, and taxpayers fund that medical school to train doctors, not social activists. That was the triggering point for me in getting into this field of medicine. I am the president of Color Us United, and we advocate for a race-blind society with high standards for all. And encouraging that kind of social activism just lowers the standard in medicine and turns people who should be great doctors into mediocre doctors who are social activists. It's not your job. That's what inspired me to get involved in this field, starting from my home state of North Carolina. But I wanted, before I got into this, into our campaign against UNC's DEI policies in the med school, I wanted to touch a little bit about the Medical College of Wisconsin event with John Seiler and Senator Johnson, who has graciously offered his time to be here. Even if you believe that DEI should be allowed in the medical school, you should have invited John Seiler and Senator Johnson, because they are offering a diverse perspective. And if you don't believe that DEI should be allowed in the med school, then you should have invited John Seiler and Senator Ron Johnson, because they're the ones that are actually able to speak clearly these central truths about whether racism really is the cause of these medical disparities. And that is relevant information for people to hear. Why? Look at this article. It says, Medical College of Wisconsin backs off hosting panel featuring Ron Johnson. Then the fallout began. This is by the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And it quoted a few experts in DEI who claimed that John Seiler and Ron Johnson have nothing good to offer in terms of content for medical students. It then goes on to say, in the third page, a Medical College of Wisconsin faculty member spoke to the Journal Sentinel on condition of anonymity, of course, because they don't want their name out there. But this is what they said. They said, there is ample evidence and research on how oppression and social inequities impact health, from race to gender to sexual orientation, the faculty member said. There is ample evidence on how racism impacts your health. And I just wanted to challenge people to show me that evidence, because I've looked at the evidence and I've been searching for the evidence that doctors' racism and unconscious bias is the reason why Black women have 3 times higher mortality rates than white women. And I can't find it. I can't find any evidence of doctors in any college systematically mistreating Black women compared to white women. Here's what I can find. I can find that Black women have a higher rate of preterm pregnancies. I also find that Black women have a higher rate of adverse life stressors that contribute to higher mortality rates in childbirth. That's what I can find. And that's a question that maybe we should answer. But is it the medical college's responsibility to answer that question? That's a political question. That is not the question of a doctor. A doctor's sole question is, how can I best treat the condition that's in front of me? And how can I assure, increase a better future for this person, regardless of their past circumstances? That is what a compassionate and truthful doctor should advocate for. So when DEI says that it is racism and implicit bias that is the cause of these health disparities, I would advocate for a different position. And that is why you need to invite somebody like John Seiler and Senator Ron Johnson to come and speak at your medical college. Because if you don't, then the only position that these people are going to be fed, that these medical students are going to be fed, is that it is the consequence of a racist society, not behavior, that has to do with these disparities. And what we know, and what any doctor that is familiar with the literature knows, is that it is not just one factor that is the cause of anything. Genetics, behavior, exercise, diet, those are the factors. Or look at what they're doing to speech and preventing doctors from speaking the truth about their viewpoint of somebody. For example, asking doctors to call a person by their pronouns and to treat a person based on their assumed gender, not on their biological sex. Think about what would happen if doctors aren't allowed to speak the truth to their parents. You know, there was an article in the Washington Post today that talked about how 21st century editors are now removing certain unpleasant phrases from 20th century books, like Roald Dahl, for example, the famous fiction artist, the famous fiction author. He wrote a sentence that said, and I'm looking at it right now, Oompa Loompas were small men and Augustus Gloop was fat. You know what the 21st century editor did? He crossed out the word fat. He wasn't allowed. Now people under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't allowed to say fat. What happens if that goes into the medical field? What happens if we start telling doctors you can't talk about obesity? Are those doctors helping those patients? Or are they just making their problems worse? That's what compelled me. Now I want to get onto the UNC campaign, because that goes from the why to the how. My organization, Color Us United, we looked at one of the task force, the task force to integrate social justice in the curriculum at UNC Medical School, an egregious anti-racism document in which they said that Black students couldn't handle lectures. So we need to lower the standards for Black students. That was in an affiliated document. There was also doctors within the med school that denounced the idea of merit in surgery and admitting surgical residents based on merit. And they sent emails out to their class saying that we should be denouncing merit-based principles. They said that we need to teach that racism is the cause of social and health disparities. And I already gave you an alternative perspective just now. And what we saw is that this would lower the best quality doctor. So here's what we did. We went to the Board of Trustees with our claims, with the task force, which was already unpopular with a large segment of the Board of Trustees. And we went to the public by launching a social media campaign that eventually got over 5,000 North Carolina signatures, saying UNC denounced the task force to integrate social justice. And we actually emailed people inside the university medical school, doctors, asked them to talk to us just confidentially, and we connected some of them with the UNC Board of Trustees. So now they're not just hearing it from us, an activist nonprofit, they're hearing it from the doctors themselves. We even partnered with a couple of congressmen and state legislatures. Senator Johnson, I don't know if you know Congressman Greg Murphy, but he was one of the people, he's North Carolina, one of the people who really went out and lobbied for us and talked to the dean of UNC Medical School, Wesley Burks, and asked him to rescind the task force to integrate social justice. We worked with several different organizations, including Do No Harm and FIRE, who came in and made a request asking the UNC to talk about this task force for social justice. Why are they imposing these DEI statements and requirements? And UNC didn't have a good answer. They just didn't have a good answer. What we did at Color Us United was we forced UNC to respond to us by going through their key stakeholders, by going to the public, since they're a public university. And I was a gadfly I was a gadfly at public board meetings too, because they were able to they made those public board meetings public. So I actually talked with Board of Trustees members at those meetings, increasing the pressure with my personal presence. And so gradually you saw this shift. UNC went from, we totally and wholeheartedly support DEI at the med school, to we tepidly and limitedly support DEI at the med school. And then in February of 2023, the Board of Governors at UNC made a decision, which is a critical decision. They prohibited DEI statements from being used in hiring, admissions, and tenure of potential applicants or candidates to the medical school. That was February 23rd, 2023. The UNC Board of Governors made that decision, meaning that you can no longer require or solicit DEI statements when asking for people's candidacy to become a doctor at your school or your health center. And we supported that decision. We pushed it out onto media to make it a media precedent, because if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it really fall? But we made sure people heard about it. And we continued that charge. And on May 11th of 2023, UNC sent a letter to one of our allied organizations, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights of Education, saying the task force to integrate social justice that you guys are concerned about we are not operationalizing its recommendations. We will not do it in the future. They renounced it. Their DEI framework. It's done. Now, are there still DEI policies at UNC's medical school that we have to clean up? Yes. But now we have the precedent. We have the public statement. And we are going to make an effort to email the employees of UNC Medical School saying, this is the decision your university has made, your medical school has made. It's up to you to let us know if they continue to pursue any of these DEI related policies, including mandatory unconscious bias training, DEI statements, racial preferences in admissions and hiring, or DEI included in your financial incentive package. And we will continue our contacts with those people. But we were able to secure that victory. And I'm really, really excited to announce that to you guys today. We're continuing our campaign to fight DEI in medicine. And I think that what John and Senator Johnson are doing at the Medical College of Wisconsin is amazing. And if Senator Johnson, if you'd like me to help at all, including maybe drafting a list of questions that we could ask the Medical College of Wisconsin about their DEI policies. That was one thing that we did pretty effectively with UNC. We went through a state legislator to force them to respond to our questions. We could draft that list of questions and send it to you as well. But in any case, what I know is this about medical schools and about schools in general, is that fighting DEI in medical colleges, you always have to return to one central message. And that message is, will this or will this not lower the quality of doctors? If we can make the case that DEI lowers the quality of doctors, we have the winning argument, because Americans are very emotionally invested in their doctors, and they have good reason to be, because those are the doctors that they trust with their lives. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kenny. So impressive, all the hard work you've done, and the results are amazing, because we hear so often that, people are trying to break through and that, they just can't seem to, or there's so much pushback. But I want to turn to Senator Johnson to hear your thoughts on what was presented and what's been going on in Wisconsin Medical College, and what, is happening at the federal level, that we can have some impact here. So thank you again. It's such an honor to have you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mendoza. Let me just pick up on what Kenny Chu just talked about. Quality is really the best argument. I did a follow-up event at Medical College of Wisconsin. They felt pretty sheepish about what happened. I think John Raymond, was just overwhelmed by the reaction pushback. And I think he probably acknowledges he didn't handle it the right way. And so they're trying to make amends. But at that event, I was obviously pushed on DEI, and I said, listen, I have no problem. I think the vast majority of Americans have no problem in diversity. We want equal opportunity. We certainly want to have an inclusive society. So we basically all agree on those goals. And when it comes to medical colleges, as long as excellence is the first cut. I was set up that way because they gave me a presentation on the new Cancer Institute and saying they wanted to create a center of excellence to attract people. So, they just kind of played right into my hands. So you're absolutely right. That is the winning argument. We need to demand excellence. And even above that first bar, there's going to be a spectrum. There's going to be the people at the very top and people just barely, go over that bar, but you have to set that bar, and you have to set that bar extremely high, because we all want the best doctors, the best surgeons giving us medical care. But let me back up a little bit. just in terms of the overall problem here that DEI fits under. If you would have asked me a couple of years ago, what was the greatest threat facing America, I would have answered Admiral Mike Mullen, the former chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying, is our debt and deficit. It's why I ran in 2010. We were mortgaging our kids' future. But today I would say it's the division in this country. And it's important to understand that this division didn't just happen. The division is being pushed on America. And I would say, I hate to say sound partisan, but it's being pushed on us by the left. The analogy I use is a middle school one. It's like a little girl goes up to Sally and say, hey, Sally, Alice doesn't like you. Completely false, but why does she go up to Alice and say that? Well, because she wants Alice to like her and to hate Sally. And in middle school, it works. It works with adults as well. And we're seeing that. Another example is, as chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, every year we would have what we call our annual threat hearing. And we would bring in the director of the FBI, counterterrorism. I mean, we'd bring up the top people to talk about the serious threats, cybersecurity, electromagnetic pulse. I mean, all the things, Islamic terror, the real threats facing this nation. And my ranking member, Senator Gary Peters from Michigan, pretty early on this process, when he became ranking member, just wanted to focus on white supremacists. Now, again, I'm no lover of white supremacists. I don't know anybody who is. I mean, we see skinheads. I mean, we know these extremist groups do exist. But I just presented in front of the Fraternal Order of Police this weekend. I asked them, in terms of the problems facing your communities, have any of you ever dealt with a white supremacist? I mean, show of hands. Nobody raised their hand. So I was always puzzled by this. He always wanted me to send letters to the FBI director in terms of what they were doing to combat white supremacists. Now we have a president of the United States that's saying white supremacists is the greatest domestic threat facing this country. It's just a big lie. But it's a lie being pushed on us to drive division and to drive hate. Another quick example. This is political also in nature, but January 6th, I was in the Senate chamber. When they closed the Senate doors, I thought a couple of crazy people had gotten through security and running around. They're just protecting us. And then they 5 minutes later opened up the door and we went back to our offices. I never felt threatened because I didn't see what was happening. Because I made that statement that I never felt threatened, I mean, I was viciously attacked. So I had to keep explaining, this is what happened. And this is the statement I made. I said, one of the reasons I wasn't concerned is I'd gone to Trump rallies. I mingled with the crowds for hours. Okay, I'd have to go there 3 hours ahead of time. I talked to people that went to those Trump rallies, the same people that basically came out here and on the Washington Mall. These are people that obviously love President Trump, but they love America. They love law enforcement. None of them would even think about breaking the law. Okay, so again, I was explaining why I wasn't concerned on January 6th about potential violence. But then I added, now, had it been, for example, the groups representing the 570 riots during the summer, 2,000 law enforcement individuals injured, $1 to $2 billion worth of property, a couple dozen deaths. Had it been, and this is where my mistake was, I said, had it been BLM and Antifa, I might have been a little concerned. That was my pretty innocuous statement. Very accurate, very true. For making that statement for a week and more, I was accused of being a racist. Because obviously I was threatened by people that were associated with BLM. So no, I would have been afraid of the groups that had done about 8,000 protests, about 570 of them had turned into riots that killed people, okay? But again, I use that as an example, is this division isn't natural. The American people are not divided, except to the extent politically we are being divided. Most Americans, we share the same goal. We want to raise our family in safety and security. We want to raise our family in a country that is safe and secure. We want to raise our family so that our children have opportunities so they can enjoy the prosperity that certainly we've enjoyed in our lives. So on the big issues, Americans, we share the same goals. Why in the world can we be so possibly or horribly divided? It's because the left is pushing hate. And let's face it, the threat of violence, as I guess Dr. Raymond was concerned about, what wasn't coming from conservatives in the Medical College of Wisconsin, it would come from those that have more left-wing views. It's those 1,000 people that all of a sudden just simply couldn't tolerate somebody like Dr. Seiler coming in and talking about diversity, or somebody like Senator Ron Johnson, who pushed back on shutdowns that devastated people, that actually were concerned about the vaccine injuries that are obvious with the COVID vaccine. They couldn't possibly hear those views, or else they might just resort to violence, is apparently what Dr. Raymond was concerned about. But again, that violence, that intolerance, that lack of diversity comes from the left, not from the right. That is just the political reality of the times. The problem we face is that the mainstream media are advocates of the left. It is populated as our federal health agencies, as our federal law enforcement agencies. These are populated at the top by people that come from the left, that do not hold diverse views, that are not tolerant, that do not believe in free speech. And those of us who do are overwhelmed by the narrative of the mainstream media. So that's what we're up against. I don't like it. I think it's a horrible reality. I am hoping at some point in time, Americans open up their eyes to what is happening, that these people that they're being told hate them don't, so they can stop hating those people, just like in middle school, that we can recognize as Americans, there are so many things we share that we agree on. And the major ones are we share that same goal. We want a successful company, country. We want safety and security. We want opportunity and prosperity. If we focus on those areas of agreement, we just might pull ourselves out of this. But I always have to warn people when I give speeches, I'm not the most uplifting character, because the reality of the situation right now is not very good. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions people have and join with Dr. Seiler and Mr. Schuh.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think your depiction, though, is accurate, because, in actually practicing healthcare, what they're trying to glob on is, as we were talking about, that, the system's racist, is just wholeheartedly not true. I mean, I'm here in the south suburbs of Chicago, mostly work, we don't look at people's skin color, but lots of Black doctors, Asian doctors, Muslim doctors. My staff is very mixed, and we're all here with a common purpose of taking care of the patients. And the patients are triaged by a triage system that has to do with their medical condition. It doesn't have anything to do with their skin color, but we have noticed that in the electronic health record, they're trying to do data collection on people's ethnicity. And that just really, shouldn't have a place. Because I think, to your point, the data collection seems to be used to create a narrative. Again, if there was really a kind of a focus on what's actually going on in healthcare, with disparities, with folks who may have more challenges getting their medicines or getting to their appointments, we would be talking about, those specific things and coming up with solutions like that. And there are innovators there who are trying to get folks rides to dialysis and different kinds of things. Those are really important, but that is nothing to do with people's ethnicity. It's just trying to solve a problem to connect them to the services that they need. I fear that there's a lag between what's being taught and now all the people here who are of a different generation. But excellence is important, but I want to say safety is a huge concern in healthcare. We have seen things. There was something posted on social media where a medical student joked or boasted that she poked a patient twice because the patient questioned her pronoun pin. These are the kind of things, when you start saying patients are objects based on immutable characteristics and you should hate them, that's the kind of thing that happened, you know, in Nazi Germany, where people started to be looked at as objects. So that culture of medicine is really, really important too, because you could have excellent physicians, but if they're not going to speak out, and if they're not going to say, hey, this is wrong, or, you know, if they're going to think that they're so smart that they can somehow, you know, fix the world by, you know, treating certain people poorly for some, you know, better thing they think, that's not good. And the other thing I wanted to point out is the electronic health record is being corrupted. It's an ideology issue. Historically, people were always registered with their sex. And if they identified as something different, that would be put in the margin. But now it's been changed where they can register, you know, in a different sex that's not their biologic sex. And we've already seen some safety issues with that. So those are the kind of things that are very, very concerning to me. But I don't know if John or Kenny, you wanted to comment on what Senator Johnson said, and then we can, you know, move over to some of the questions. John, I'll throw it to you, since we talked about the medical college in Wisconsin again.
Yeah, I do think that right now we're looking at a situation where a lot of people in elite institutions or elite positions, you know, in leadership at large corporations or at prestigious universities, prestigious hospitals, they are open to considering ideas that a lot of ordinary people would think are just crazy. So for instance, if you look at UC San Francisco's School of Medicine, which is a top NIH funding recipient. That's one of the ways that medical schools are evaluated. If you receive a lot of funding from the NIH, that means that you're a really, really strong institution. And UC San Francisco is one of the top. They published basically a guide to race relations and essentially DEI, where they posit a definition of racism that essentially says that racism is a prioritization of white people over non-white people. So that implicit in this idea of racism is that only people who are white or of European descent maybe can be racist, which is just totally untrue. And you get a lot of this in a lot of different, you know, a lot of different kind of areas of life. You can look at the way that people in elite institutions talk about gender versus what a lot of people, even just 10 years ago, what people almost would have universally thought was true about gender. It's really quite crazy. And you have to ask, how did that happen? And I think I would agree that a lot of this didn't happen organically. A lot of it rather happened, I would say, you know, maybe not as a conscious effort, but rather through the creation of a massive bureaucracy that encourages administrators to push forward ideas about specifically race and gender that are, you know, cutting edge, or that are that feed into a particular view of the world. And I think that that's exactly what we've seen with DEI. And the growth of DEI pretty well matches the growth of a lot of really divisive ideas that I think are actually just on their own merits, not very, both extremely shaky ideas, extremely tenuous, but also extremely damaging. They lead to consequences that are really, really bad. They lead to people allocating COVID treatment on the basis of race, which could lead to people who really need treatment to not get it, or could have at the time when that policy was in place. So this is, you know, these are serious issues with real consequences. And it's not just that it happened organically, like Senator Johnson said, it happened because we have this infrastructure in place, and that should make people very skeptical of what this entire bureaucracy is up to.
Yeah, well, Senator, how do we get at the bureaucracy and change it? I mean, I agree with what John's saying. I mean, so much of what we see in the bureaucracy of healthcare seems like a parallel universe to what we need clinically. I think they're part of the fuel of this is the fact that there's cost shifting, and because of the burdens with the aging population and Medicare and with Medicaid, I think anything that is seen as like a new cost center that they could say we're giving value to healthcare, or with the gender ideology as a new revenue stream they just gravitate to. But how do we work to make the bureaucracy more responsive to what our needs really are in healthcare?
Well, let me go to the big concepts. What has made America successful for more than 200 years is called the one essential ingredient, called freedom. And when it comes to DEI, we're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of action. But freedom is what has allowed people to dream and aspire and build and create this great nation. But there's a higher value, and it's truth. And I would argue what the reason Kenny Xu was successful in UNC is he finally got the board of governors to understand what the truth is. To diagnose how we got to this place, I'm old enough I saw it happen. And by the way, I think this is purposeful. I mean, I watched, again, the story about the white supremacists. I mean, that's coming out of left field. That's not the major threat. And yet that is something that they were building on. Democrats were to blame the right. But I saw college administrations capitulate during the 60s. During the Vietnam War protests, and the radical left took over our university system. So they control college of journalism, of law, of education, including medical colleges. And so they're cranking out a bunch of leftists. We don't graduate journalists anymore. We graduate advocates for the left. We graduate lawyers that want to become judicial activists. We graduate teachers that want to indoctrinate our children, and they are indoctrinating them. And they are being told what the indoctrination is going to be. Again, they're lies, it's false, but it's an organized effort to push things like critical race theory, where most of America embraced what Dr. Martin Luther King talked about: judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. We embrace that. In my lifetime, I've seen discrimination decline dramatically. It's not gone. There'll always be hate. But we've made great strides at reducing discrimination in all forms, squeeze out of society. Why not celebrate that success? Well, we're not being allowed to celebrate that success because there's an organized effort to push hate. And the best way to get people to hate each other is divide people along demographic lines, right? Whether it's race, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual preference, sexual orientation. So I believe this is being engineered. I can't tell you exactly who, what groups, but it's all so effective. It's also universal that I think this is being pushed. So the pushback is literally what Governor Sanders talked about in her response. So, this is crazy. Call it out for what it is. It's crazy. It's false. It's wrong. Here's the truth. But we're up against powerful forces. We certainly saw that in COVID. Mm-hmm. It was obvious we should have treated early, but we weren't allowed to. It was obvious these vaccines, as the VAERS deaths were growing rapidly in the first couple of months, that we ought to look at this. We ought to study it. We ought to use caution. It was obvious, but the American public wasn't made aware of this because of what I always call the COVID cartel. These are powerful people. When you control the media, when you control federal agencies, when you control the funding and the grant money, research colleges are going to do what the Anthony Fauci of the world are going to tell them to do. So we're up against powerful forces when it comes to COVID, powerful forces that at this point, they can't afford to be proven wrong because the body count's way too high. That's just that example. But throughout this, again, this is the effort of the radical left. You know, go back to Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. They do it time and time again. They use this, but they're pushing hate. They're dividing us. The only thing that'll set us that'll solve this problem is the truth.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Senator Johnson. I totally sympathize because there was a fellow over here who was treated by the UNC system, and they got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and then he even claims that his own wife died because of it, because his wife is unfortunately passed. I'm not sure. I'm not a scientist on that, but
So let me give you some facts real quick. Okay, let me hop in here. The VSAFE system set up specifically to track vaccine safety. Now they didn't give enough criteria to fill in. Is literally just did you have to seek medical care, or did you lose like a day of work or something? Was your daily routine affected? Out of 10 million people signed up for this, 7.7% had to seek medical care. How many medical interventions result in having to go seek medical care? If it's close to 8%, you go, something's not right here. 25% of people either had to stay home from work or school, or had their daily routine impacted to that extent. That's not a safe vaccine. VAERS, we're up over 33,000 deaths worldwide. 25% of those deaths are occurring either the day of vaccination or within 1 or 2 days. Over 1.5 million adverse events. This is unprecedented in terms of reports on the VAERS, and the FDA is trashing their own system that they were touting before they got the emergency use authorization. I could go down this rabbit hole a long time, but it is obvious. And I've met the vaccine injured. These vaccine injuries are real. The vaccine absolutely has killed people. It has permanently disabled them. These vaccine injuries are real. And that was my final plea when I was at the medical college and said, please, last thing I said, please take all vaccine injuries seriously. Research them, help these people. They deserve at least that. They've been gaslit way too long.
Yeah, well, I think that, the whole COVID topic, I know it's not our main focus of this, but, I also, being an emergency medicine physician, was on the front line at the beginning. So I know the whole truth, exactly what happened, who was sick, what was going on, the whole thing in Wisconsin and here, which we'll talk about separately and all, but I had just never seen it. It was a perfect example of, I was like, why are they talking about all these things? That's not what's happening here in the emergency department. Why are the schools being closed? Why it was so divergent from how we ever handled anything. In a lot of other, serious issues, again, more people are killed from gunshots wounds in Chicago on the weekend, young people, than were for COVID for young people in Chicago, but yet nobody is, raised concerns about that my whole, life here. So I think it's just the fact of not being able to talk about what was really going on, what was so disturbing to me. And, that's what we're, trying to highlight here, because in medicine, we get down to safety. We at FAIR had people, I had a doctor contact me in Wisconsin who said the hospital was giving out the convalescent plasma based on race. Mm-hmm. She didn't want to come forward, but that's so scary. I'm not saying that it was really helping people, but you never should do that. I'm shocked that would be our country. That's not how we practice medicine. So
let me
go ahead.
There was an agenda, okay? Yeah. And the reason I bring it up is this is the reason I was invited to speak at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I didn't realize the event was a diversity, equity, and inclusion. I had no idea. I was being asked to talk about what I had seen, what I've uncovered in terms of what happened. But there was an agenda. It was an agenda driven by the Faucis of the world. And most people don't want to admit the federal health agencies could be so corrupt. Mm. And that's we just have our entire society in a huge state of denial in terms of what happened during COVID. They just want to move on. But you take a look at the human toll, the economic devastation of the shutdowns. You take a look at the human toll of the vaccine injuries. You take a look at how people were treated in the hospitals Okay. We need to understand this. We need to expose the truth so it never happens again.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's this point of having the ability to freely talk. I mean, I've took care of patients down here who would be people that the vaccine would benefit because of their comorbidities and age, obese, diabetes, different things. But because of the legacy, say like with Tuskegee, they're like, well, I don't trust anything. I'm not going to get it. And then I'd be up in Kenosha, someone would come in, very far along, it didn't get vaccinated, again, comorbidities, but didn't take the vaccine for reasons because they just felt like there was no nuance, that there was a lack of trust. The people that it was appropriate for, which is normally how we have medical conversations, where it was just such a disservice. And then people—
It's because we told them masks weren't required, then all of a sudden you need to wear 3 of them.
Yeah.
We had to shut down society, but the working poor couldn't quit work. It was just people in the ivory towers that, had a desk job could quit. Otherwise, the rest of America had to go to work and risk getting infected and, gut it out.
Yeah, I mean,
we could go down.
I know we won't go to, yeah.
Quite honestly, but
I think it's important in terms of a conversation related to DEI and any type of like you can't talk in medicine. That is counter to safety and healthcare. It's just not a safe environment. So these are good examples, but I'll go to some questions because it's somewhat related, and maybe Kenny, you want to take this as, we sort of touch on it. How did the AAMC get hijacked by this orthodoxy? I mean, John, you talked about a little bit, but how's it difficult to push back when the head of these medical schools are pushing these policies down? And I will say some of this I feel is a jobs program for adults who also don't want to practice clinical medicine. I'm sorry, people out there might get mad at me. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but if you're not in your position gonna stand up for what's right, you're sort of just becoming part of the problem. So maybe speak towards the AAMC and its hijacking, and what things we could do to get towards, get at them in terms of this change. Is it the Kenny
American
playbook?
Association? Yeah, the American Association of Medical Colleges. The influencer of accreditation for a lot of these medical schools. That is what Carrie is talking about. In a way, it's like you should almost ask the question, what organizations are not hijacked by DEI? The main point that I want to stress here to the audience is it all comes down to education. Education. That's why all of these institutions have gone woke. If anybody asks me, like, why is Bank of America gone woke, or why is Target gone woke? Just go back to education. Go back to what higher ed did and K-12 is doing right now. Look at the education schools that started teaching their teachers back in the 1960s and 70s, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where the purpose of a teacher is to divide people into privileged and oppressed groups. Because that's what Paulo Freire, the South American communist educator, who later sold the 3rd best-selling education book of all time, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, argued. He said, if you want to inspire a kid to learn, you have to teach them about their place in society. And what he meant is you're part of the proletariat, striving against an oppressive bourgeoisie. So DEI is just an extension of critical race theory, or critical theory, which is just an extension of what is being taught in the education schools from the 1970s. I mean, if you want to know the full story, this is what my new book, this is the manuscript for it, hasn't come out yet, but it's called School of Woke. It'll be out August 1st, and you can pre-order it now, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. So that's the question you should ask. Of course, these institutions are going to get corrupted because higher education, a lot of ambitious, striving Americans want to go into higher education. Higher education pushes these CRT ideas on these kids, and then they go out into their jobs and then they become woke.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Sure.
Because I would also say that when you look at academic disciplines that have really embraced far-reaching DEI policies that are truly harmful in a lot of ways, that I would at least argue. Often what you find is that it correlates pretty closely with how many administrators are associated with that discipline. So, some disciplines, they don't have very robust professional organizations. That's not true of medicine. Medicine has far more administrators than any other discipline. Given its nature, you're talking about hospitals. You have to have, and legitimately, there are good reasons to have really heavy-handed accreditors. And what that means is that you have a really robustly staffed organization like the AAMC, in addition to the American Medical Association, in addition to all of the really robustly staffed, discipline and field specific organizations. And administrators have a lot of time on their hands, and they have the ability to dictate policy, and they also are legitimately an easier target for social activism. If you're a professor of physics and a social activist comes to you and says you should spend more time focusing on DEI than the discipline that you've devoted your life to, you'll probably say no. If you're a medical doctor and an activist, a full-time medical practitioner, and an activist comes and tells you that, you'll probably say no too. I actually don't think that medical doctors want to spend an inordinate amount of their time focusing on DEI rather than focusing on, the work that they've devoted their lives to doing. But administrators, that's an easier thing to do from the start. And I think also, I would say that in addition to, education, which Kenny points as a kind of a root cause of a lot of this stuff, I would also say that the structure of highly bureaucratic organizations tends to lend itself to this kind of thinking. These are managerial institutions, and it goes along with kind of the nature of the managerial class to want to classify things, to want to be able to control everything down to say the exact demographic makeup of an organization or the exact way that people interact with one another. And if that requires administrators to lead sessions teaching you about how if you say something in a slightly wrong way, then you're a racist and you need to change what you say and say it in a slightly different way, then that's all the better for a group of people who are employed to do pretty much exactly that kind of thing. So I would say, it's important to look at how these administrative organizations exercise power. And so the second part of that question is, why hasn't there been any pushback? Often it just comes down to, what are the incentives? And there's really just no incentive for AAMC members to push back. There are pretty much all costs and very few benefits to doing that. Just like until recently, there were only costs for the UNC School of Medicine administrators to say anything to do anything besides to capitulate to activists. You have to change those costs and benefits. And I would say, I'm happy that we have a lawmaker on this webinar. A lot of these things are sanctioned by law. The LCME, the organization that accredits medical schools, is recognized by the US Department of Education. That recognition, I'm sure, could change if and could certainly be made conditional upon certain things. I'm not exactly sure how you would do that, but it's much easier exercise to create constraints in public organizations. And I think to the extent that these organizations have kind of ways that state legislatures or even the federal government can change the incentives, I think that that's how we need to be thinking more and more.
Yeah, just real quickly, the Medical College of Wisconsin has 1,500 students. It has 6,000 staff. So basically, for every student, it has 4 staff members.
Wow. I mean, I know we could use some extra staff members here in the ER. Again, I think there's a disconnect between the actual practice and the bureaucracy. But thank you guys for answering that. Senator, there's a question here that I think is for you. It says moderate Democrats used to be a force for reason in Congress, but recently are unable or unwilling to stand up to the ultra far left. At the same time, moderates would sooner cut off a limb than be connected to the party of Donald Trump. This leaves moderates with no options. Do you think the Republican Party will change and win over the support of moderates who desperately want the policies they're willing to fight for? If so, how will that happen?
Well, I mean, I certainly long for candidates and elected officials who more than just pay lip service to trying to unify and heal this nation. I think it's quite interesting that Robert F. Kennedy in his announcement, his 2-hour announcement event there, talked about healing this country. He's giving some pretty interesting podcast talking about in detail about all kinds of subjects. Not afraid of talking about anything. Listen, our politics are very divided right now, and unfortunately, any elections, divisiveness seems to work better than unification. And certainly here in Washington, D.C., everybody's in their corners. Everything, what we accomplish, the big things are generally along partisan lines. There's all kinds of things we do get done. For example, I was the champion of right to try. That passed the Senate unanimously. That piece of legislation actually is saving people's lives, so that's a good thing. But when it comes to the major issues, debt and deficits, we're a world apart. Now, one thing that we are quite bipartisan in is in mortgaging our kids' future. So when you're begging for bipartisanship, be careful what you're asking for, because that is one thing Washington, D.C. is very good at doing within the uniparty in a bipartisan fashion, is just spend a lot of money that we don't have. And that's still, divisiveness right now, I think, is the biggest problem facing this nation, but the debt deficit is not going away.
Yeah, that's been a tough one my whole life, but thank you. Yeah, I mean, part of what FAIR was born from, this, real desire to bring people together too and have conversations across, different beliefs. So thank you for saying that, and again for being here. Let's see, we've got another question. This I think falls into the, sort of, why is DEI bad? Show me the proof. Someone says, is there research that has looked at the quality of care that is given by people who believe DEI principles and people who believe in merit? I don't want to read into her question, but kind of that, like, well, where is the evidence here that this might be causing harm, or is there evidence that it's helping? So I don't know, Kenny or John, you want to take that?
I think that you can. I mean, no, there are no studies out there that say the people who believe in DEI have X worse outcome. I mean, it's pretty hard to even measure that. The best studies that I can point to are, if you just look at the direct evidence of UNC's medical curriculum, now that, before we came on the scene, 1/8 of their curriculum was devoted to studying a topic called health and human disparities. And that required people to study DEI, so racism in society. So when 1/8 of your curriculum is tied to studying things that are irrelevant from the point of scientific medical consensus, then that is 1/8 of your education that we are paying for that is going to waste. So I think that that's one piece of evidence you can use. You can also talk about when you have mandatory unconscious bias trainings, which is another DEI principle, and the onerous nature of them that it puts on doctors. You have to sit in front of a computer and basically, read prompts about racism and everything like that. And the lack of inspiration that people feel after that, I think, is another example that you can use.
Yeah. John, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we are going to see a direct correlation between people learning about DEI or adopting certain beliefs about race and their ability, their decreased ability to function as doctors. I'm not sure if that's how it works. I will say that when you devote a lot of your curriculum to something that is other than, how to operate as someone, as a medical doctor, and when you change the standards for admissions, or you change the standards for who qualifies as faculty at a medical school, I think that, that's something that is absolutely pushed by DEI advocates, then you will see a decrease in quality, capacity of your students. You will see professors who might be very, very good at talking about DEI, but maybe a little less good at teaching, or a little less good at their academic discipline. And that's the kind of thing that, I think we can establish does happen. And so to the extent that that happens, I think, it's not so much a matter of studying how particular ideas affect the way that people function in practice, but rather it's looking at what are the admission standards? What are the standards of excellence? And are they being decreased? And if you are throwing out traditional standards of excellence in favor of what is effectively social activism, then I think we can make a pretty pragmatic argument that that's going to have downstream effects. And that's one of the big things that I think we're warning about.
And by the way, just to chime in, I will say the Medical College of Wisconsin says that their DEI program does not impact quality at all. In fact, they believe it enhances it. And I think it's pretty hard to push back that, a diverse group of people aren't, a better group of people. So you can't really prove it, but it isn't just a matter of if they drop standards, they have dropped standards. And I've heard time and time again, people on admission boards just being handed a stack of envelopes to evaluate candidates and say, well, these three we're just going to let in. And you can imagine who those three are without any evaluation whatsoever. So I think, haven't they dropped, and I'm not an expert in this, but haven't they dropped certain types of testing for graduate school? And I mean, they have watered down standards, and to me, that's just obvious evidence that standards have been relaxed and quality is going to decline.
Yeah, the AMC changed the requirements for step 1 medical licensing exams from graded to pass-fail, which means that people will not get ranks anymore in terms of where they stand with regards to their exams. And of course, that was made to admit more Black doctors. But the problem is they're admitting more Black doctors at the expense of lowering standards. I have no problem with admitting Black doctors. I have a problem with lowering your standards to admit Black doctors. And that is what is happening at med school.
And I think the other place is just within residencies, and are they lowering standards in competitive residencies and spots filled, and then that trickles down to safety events, quality, in the hospital and clinics. This is also mandated patient experience scores. I think there's ways to sort of look at, again, some of these regulatory things and try and work them towards, flanking more about, quality and safety. So those things are reported in the hospital, but again, there is a lag between training. And then of course there's the, plaintiff's bar, medical malpractice is still a thing. Certain states have caps. That ultimate, sort of guardrail too when you get out. So again, it's a call to doctors who are working now to speak out when they see things. So somewhat related question, a little strand on this topic is, someone writes, I agree with the speakers regarding the loss of standards in the name of DEI for the medical profession. I know this is occurring at UW School of Medicine. How do we publicize this more? Because as you said, if the public understands the DEI programs may affect the quality of the physicians, that could help change some of these institutional DEI standards. I think maybe that gets at, our modern tools of social media and other things. Maybe, you all can touch on that. I know, Kenny, it sounds like that was a successful aspect of your campaign using, social media and other media platforms. So the question is how do we get direct to public about these concerns?
Our main message was asking North Carolinians to answer a simple question. Do you prefer a doctor of a certain race or the most qualified doctor? And it's a pretty fair question because that's ultimately the choice that you have to make at medical schools. And the vast majority of North Carolinians enthusiastically said, I don't care if my doctor is black, white, Asian, green. I just want the most qualified doctor. And so when you go down, and so what we did was we did Facebook ads that basically said black doctors are equally capable, don't lower standards for their entry. We even brought a guest speaker who came from Cameroon, who basically came from nothing and graduated from Harvard Medical School to, explain why excellence should trump diversity every time. And we also had ads that, featured patients, being cared by a doctor, and the doctor asked them, so do you support social justice? And that, of course, played off of, well, you don't want your doctor to be social activists. You want your doctor to be quality treating you.
Yeah, I mean, again, when I'm actually practicing, patients know if they're not getting quality care. We see that with doctor shopping in some aspects. They'll say, oh, well, I don't think that person really understood or knew what they were talking about. That's why I came to the ER. Or telehealth. Well, I didn't, I really want to see a doctor in person. So, yeah, I think, patients, when you talk to about, they want their problem solved. They don't care what skin color or sex or anything I am. They want to know I'm competent, and that I'm, their advocate for their health. So, John, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's important that when you can speak up, to speak up. I think that a lot of it is a matter of pushing back in the ways that you can. As far as spreading the word goes, a lot of what's going on at these institutions is still unknown. And the more you simply bring it to light, the more I think the intuitively problematic aspects of this bureaucracy will just be evident to ordinary people. All I have really had to do is write about these things for a lot of changes to take place. Often, if you highlight what's going on at these institutions, the institutions will respond by changing their policies. And so, I guess I can use that as a segue to a little pitch. If you know of instances where these kind of egregious policies are being adopted, feel free to send them to me. Feel free to let me know about them, because these are the kinds of things that I certainly am interested in writing about, because I think they're important. Yeah.
And also there are lots of great organizations. Obviously, FAIR, we're doing work, Kenny's doing work, FIRE. So yes, we love to see the startups trying to push back. One question here, we've got some Canadian friends, and we maybe touch on a little bit, but what advice do you guys have for pushing back on the name calling? Like you're dash phobic, you're racist, you're, whatever it is. I know Senator Johnson spoke a little bit about it. It's like these people that you say anything like, we have a lot of issues, concerns with safety and gender care for minors, and people just throw out insults at you. So what do you guys recommend as your retort when you're talking with people who throw out the insults?
Yeah, I would first point out who generally uses those insults. Again, I hate sounding partisan. It's generally not coming from the right. It's not. It's coming from the left. And so that's, again, it's about the truth. It's tenaciously pursuing it and exposing the truth and conveying. And then you have to hope that truth has its own power. But we're up against a media that won't tell that truth. They use the phrase again, the example I used about January 6th. I mean, trust me, I'm not a racist. but I was being called a racist. You know, I was saying the quiet part out loud. You know, it's like, no, I was just pointing out the obvious that 8,000 protests resulted in 570 riots and injured 2,000 police officers, billion. I was just stating the obvious, the truth. And for telling the truth, I was called a racist. Or for being concerned about vaccine injuries, I'm called an anti-vaxxer, which I'm not. Okay. And that, by the way, is almost as bad as being called a racist nowadays. And so people use those terms to push hate and to further divide us. So again, just had to point out the truth of what's happening there.
Even Wikipedia says that the Black Lives Matter riots was the largest destruction of property in dollars enumerated in the history of the United States. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and we say here at FAIR, don't take the bait, and speak the truth and be kind, but also know your facts. But yeah, it's very disarming. But I think you're right. We see it as a tactic. So we have time for one more question. We'll go around. I think this is a good one to end with. Go around the circle briefly. I've got a friend on here who was a cancelee, who was canceled when she didn't want to take one of those bias tests. She was canceled as a nurse. So, and she works, in the space doing great work. But her question is, what do you see as the next latest thing that we will need to be ready to confront? You know how it's always, a new tactic or strategy. So what do you think the latest thing, I guess, in this sort of attempt to divide us, I think is what she's saying. What's going to be the next thing, or are they being so effective with their current way they're going about things?
I think this might be a little bit of a different answer than you're looking for, but I think one thing to pay attention to is the upcoming Supreme Court decision regarding racial preferences in admissions. And I do expect that the result of that decision might be a little bit different than what some people are hoping for. I have reason to think that the decision will put an end to racial preferences. But if that happens, I expect universities to actually double down on their attempts to push DEI in all facets of their institutions. In some ways, the worst offenders, the institutions that have most embraced DEI are in states where racial preferences are already not legal. And the reason that DEI is so prominent there is precisely because it functions as racial preferences by another means. So I imagine that if there is a decision to end racial preferences, we might see a lot of institutions saying this means we need to all the more embrace DEI. And that as far as what's next, I think that it's in a way more of the same, but in response to that likely Supreme Court decision.
Okay. We just have a brief minute, but Kenny, I'll give it to you, and then Senator Johnson, we'll have you close us out with your thoughts after Kenny.
Well, thank you guys for having me, and this has been a great event. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. The concise answer is look out for institutions to start hiding data. That's what they're going to start doing. Because once you go after what the conservatives, our strategy has been with some public success is to reveal public documents through FOIA and to sort of expose them. And then it obviously, because the stuff that they're preaching is so radical and bad, makes it unpopular, and then it generates a social media frenzy, and then they have to revise that policy. But you're going to start seeing universities not complying with FOIA requests anymore. You're going to start seeing universities not even giving us data on the race of their applicants and what standards are being used to which applicants. You're going to see universities that will just say, we don't have the data on results of surgeries, even though you actually are required to provide the STS, Society of Thoracic Surgeons, your mortality rate in your surgery clinics. You're going to start seeing universities just stop providing that data. It's just going to be massive non-compliance with data-driven principles. And I think that's where we have to strike. We have to devise a strategy to get around that.
Wow. Okay. And then Senator Johnson, you want to close it out with what you think might be next?
Well, I'll point out they already are hiding data on a massive scale. They're not being honest. They're not being transparent with us. But what they'll do is they'll exploit any situation to further push division and hate. I mean, that's what George Floyd, as tragic as that thing was. I mean, the left has used that. And that's the result again, was the 570 riots. So they'll continue to do this. They've got a game plan. This didn't just happen. So we just need more and more Americans aware of it, and more Americans to dedicate themselves to unify and heal this nation, and focus on the areas of agreement, the goals we share. We have to fix this. This nation, again, a house divided cannot stand. And that was true back with Lincoln. It's true today.
Wow, that was great words and thoughts to end with. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here with FAIR. And I just so appreciate you all taking your time, Senator Johnson, John and Kenny. We didn't get to all the questions. We will try to email responses if we can. Just a quick plug for a couple FAIR events. We have an event with Braver Angels tomorrow, and then on June 20th, I'm having a webinar with the whistleblower, Jamie Reed, from the Children's Hospital Transgender Clinic in St. Louis, and her lawyer to talk about the ideology and the safety concerns there. But we here at FAIR really want everyone to talk, so we can not be divided. And with that, I will say good afternoon. I appreciate everyone across the web and here on Zoom listening. And again, thank you, Senator John and Kenny. Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care.
Bye. Okay, take care.
Take care.